Well, good morning, everybody. I'll be your co-host today with General Smith as we take you through this really exciting day to discuss aviation topics. It's my honor to introduce our first speaker today, Major General Clair Gill, the Commanding General of the United States Army Aviation Center of Excellence in Fort Novosel, where he assumed command this year. He's a master Army aviator with over 3,400 flight hours and over 4 years in combat. The Aviation Center of Excellence generates highly trained, disciplined, and fit aviation soldiers. It develops expert leaders of combined arms maneuver, drives changes to fight and win in multi-domain operations, and imparts the aviation warfighter culture across the total aviation force. Major General Gill will set the stage for today's hot topic by providing an Army Aviation Branch update. General Gill.
What a fantastic morning. What a fantastic opportunity to be here with some of our legacy leaders. I just want to say thanks to General Smith, AUSA, and certainly to General Davis and Quad A for hosting this. It's just a great opportunity for us to get together and talk about something obviously many of us are very passionate about and many of us have dedicated the best years of our lives to, and that's Army Aviation. Army Aviation is a member of the Combined Arms team. Army Aviation is a member of the Joint Force, and how we fight in the future. And so I think as we go through the day today, we're going to talk a lot about where we've been and things that we're doing, but we're also really looking to the future. And I think a lot of you appreciate that the battlefields of yesteryear are different than the battlefields that we're contemplating for the future. So it's just great to be here today. We do have a great lineup. As you heard, we got the Vice Chief of Staff of the Army is going to be coming in a little bit later this morning. So I'm really excited that he's dedicating some time to talk about Army Aviation. So as you heard, Army Aviation, Decisive in the Air-Ground-Littoral. What is that, you might ask? It's the same thing that we've been operating in over the years, but it's that space between where we've always operated. It's in the ground domain, but in the air, right? And so when we talk, probably when we get to the panels later today, a lot of you will probably have questions about survivability, lethality, all those things, the ability to sustain ourselves over distance. We've got experts that are all here that are going to talk to that today. So should be some great discussion. This is really a forum for us to do a little bit of listening as well. So we'll have some prepared remarks and you'll hear from all of us, but I think the questions and when we get to some media roundtables this afternoon will be really help us illuminate, where industry is and where the Army is trying to go with Army Aviation. So as I am getting my legs under me, I'm about a month into the job. I'm learning the various hats that I wear. One of them is the Senior Commander Fort Novosel, the home of Army Aviation. I hadn't been back in a while. If you drive through the gate, the first thing you're going to hear is welcome home. It is great to be back at Fort Novosel and having the opportunity there to lead our soldiers and families where they work and train. The other one is the Commanding General of the Army Aviation Center of Excellence. Obviously, that's where we provide that initial tactical level training for everything from obviously our aviators, our pilots, but we also have the unmanned systems that we train out at Fort Huachuca and all of our maintainers up at Fort Eustis, Virginia. But we're also about developing leaders, right? And so warfighting leaders that don't think of themselves as just operating aircraft and flying airplanes or helicopters, but warfighters that operate in that air-ground-littoral, in that domain with the folks on the ground, the soldiers that we support. And so that's one of the things in terms of the culture where I'd really like us to be. I want us to think of ourselves as three-dimensional problem solvers for the Army. And then the last one, and probably most surprising to me, is my role as the force modernization proponent. I bet I've spent 80% of my time talking about where we're going, the capabilities that we're trying to develop, how that synchronizes in with all the things that Army Futures is doing, FORCECOM is out operating and sustaining through Army Materiel Command. That's an area where we're going to spend a good amount talking about today as we think about how we integrate through the whole .mil PFP realm. But I think everybody can appreciate that we're really focused on what the future fight looks like in this idea of large-scale combat operations in a multi-domain environment. We all spent the last 20 years, the 2 decades of our careers fighting in COIN and counterterrorism, which is what the nation needed us to do. But for many of us in the room here, probably the front half, maybe front third forward, we started off thinking about high-end, large-scale combat operations, principally focused on Russia. I'm sure today we'll talk about, current events and things, but now as we see Russia's acute threat, we're really thinking about China as a pacing threat as well. And obviously we've got another whole host of malign actors that's outlined in our national defense strategy. Okay, so if we can go forward one slide, please. I don't have a lot of slides, and they're not going to, not a whole lot of things to talk about on them other than this is how we see Army aviation. This is what we do. The way I view it, we're the same thing as everybody on the ground. We just do it in that third dimension, right? So we see and sense. We're intel collectors, just like the folks on the ground that are collecting things through national means. We strike. Same way that artillery or armor or infantry strikes on the battlefield, we can do it probably in a more dynamic manner and often in a very responsive way. We move things, right? Whether it's moving in an admin role in the rear area or whether we're assaulting forward and going deep. Obviously, aviation does that at a scale and a pace that nobody else can do. And then extending the battlefield, whether it's command and control, whether it's sustainment activities, whether it's going to get soldiers and bring them, injured soldiers and bring them back to safety. That's really our role. So just, I just want to talk about Fort Novosel and where the branch is for a couple seconds here to give you an idea, sort of the scale of what we're doing for our Army. As I think about kind of the number of folks that we train, so the number that the team gave me was 18,000 courses graduated in a year. Now, we don't put through 18,000 students, but that might be one student that comes in, goes to a basic course, maybe goes to SEER training, goes through the various phases of flight training, but 18,000 curriculums that we execute every year with a total of 1,380 initial entry rotary wing students and almost 581 international students out of 34 countries. So for scale, that's 223,000 flight hours. That's a third of what the entirety of the Army flies, right? So that's a fairly breakneck clip that we do on a routine basis. That's effectively 6 cabs worth of flying hours every year. It's not without risk. Many of you know that we've had a couple accidents lately. We've had a lot of accidents over the last 2 years. And I think that's something that we ought to talk about here today in terms of what are we doing about it. Some of it, is something that we can look at in terms of upscaling our aircraft. Some of it's how we train and then discipline that we put into the force. Okay, so 2 years ago, almost exactly 2 years ago at AUSA, the Army released one of our capstone documents, the FM 3.0. It's our operations manual. It's how we fight, right? And it talks about how we fight in this large scale combat operations environment. We have also in the aviation realm updated our manual. So 3.04 or 3-04 is Army aviation operations, and that's going to be coming out probably in the next 4 or 5 months here. So that's going to mirror what 3.0 talks about in terms of operating in a multi-domain environment and large-scale combat operations, and where we see the Army going in the next 10 to 15 years. I think if you've seen some things out of Army Futures Command, they've talked about transforming in contact. That's what we're doing right now. They've talked about, help me out here, Kane, with the second one, deliberate transformation for like the 2 to 7 year period. And then concept-driven transformation, which really gets us out to about 15 years. So we're trying to figure out kind of an overlay of where does aviation fit into that, and how do we operate in that same set of time periods as we're doing the now, which is the things that are currently happening in our formations. What are we doing over the next 2 to 7, which we're going to talk about some things in terms of design, and then where are we going long term? Okay, so 3.04 is coming out. I don't want to steal Matt's. Matt, are you going to talk about force design update at all, Matt Brayman? Okay, so I'll just highlight, preview a little bit of it. So the force design update was approved in the R-Struct, and what that's going to do is really optimize how our Army aviation formations are aligned against what the division missions are doing, right? So light divisions are going to have more assault capability. Heavy divisions are going to really donate some of that, and then we're going to fix what we call broken icons, right? So we've got some formations out there that have flags that have no aircraft or people, and so Matt will talk you through what that's going to look like. We're putting a little more air assault back into the air assault division. Additionally, we're updating our professional military education that's happening at all of our schoolhouses. So the warrant officer professional military education is really getting back to focusing them on being the experts in their trade, right? Rather than teaching them staffing skills and some of the sort of standard curriculum things that we want of mid-grade officers, we really want our warrant officers focused on the tactical fight, right? So understanding how to operate the aircraft in this domain that we've been talking about in a multi-domain environment. And similarly, we're graduating each of their levels assigned that are going to match how they're tracked, right? So you come in, you're tracked, you go to a certain level of PME, and the next time you come back, it would continue to graduate through all the way through W5. Out at the 213th, so that's our battalion that trains unmanned systems out in Arizona at Fort Huachuca. We're updating the programs of instruction, the POIs. And what we're really focusing there is on training our 150 uniforms, our 15 whiskeys and echoes. Those are our warrant officer and enlisted operators and the maintainers of the aircraft. We've been focused on a couple systems, the RQ-7 and the MQ-1. We're getting away from that. And we'll talk a little bit about what the Army did with RQ-7 in terms of canceling the program. But now we're getting to this future tactical unmanned aerial system environment where we're looking at systems that are runway independent and can be modified in sort of at the pace of technology. So we're looking at training them so that they're going to be platform agnostic unmanned system operators. Okay, and then the last one is the Unit Trainer Evaluator Program. So this is a program where we've tried to take some of the stress off of our instructor pilots out in the units, where we're taking our talented aviators and putting them through a curriculum that's vetted by DES, our Directorate of Evaluations and Standardization, and allowing them to do certain tasks where they can train and evaluate young aviators, progress them so that the IPs can focus on the high-end training, the collective training that we really need them focused on doing. So this UTE program is turning out to be pretty good. Not all units have taken advantage of it, but those that have are seeing some relief in terms of the stress that we have on our force. And then I think I'm fairly certain when the vice comes in later this morning, he's going to talk about getting back to the basics, right? So one of the things that we're seeing is we are producing aviators that come out and are proficient, but they're really focused on operating systems and less on flying the aircraft. And in many cases, what we're hearing from the field is we need them flying the aircraft. We can teach them systems operations and maintenance, but we really need them to be proficient aviators first. And so my sense is the vice will probably talk a little bit about that. We're looking at that. We're always looking at that, particularly at Fort Novosel, in terms of how do we train aviators to be, we only get them for about 150 hours, right? It takes about a year. How do we get them to be the most proficient aviator that we can deliver to the force, where they understand how to fly the aircraft and are proficient in some of the more modernized aircraft that we transition them into? So we're always looking for a way there that we can optimize cost and performance while producing a better aviator. And that may include things like AR, VR, more simulator time. It might be less simulator time. So we're just taking a look at that across the center right now. Okay, so I think we're already on the modernized slide here. So this is kind of the battlefield, the way we see it. I think our signature modernization system right now is, I think everybody here appreciates, it's the FLRAA, the Future Long Range Assault Aircraft. And we really think that brings a new level of speed, range, lethality as we operate as a member of the Combined Arms team over what we currently have in the fleet, which are great aircraft, but our legacy aircraft just, don't have that generational leap that we're bringing on board with future vertical lift. And I'm sure we'll talk about that in a panel later today. Launched effects, specifically air-launched effects. We think this is one of the more decisive technologies that's coming on board, where we can put machines out there to do all the things that I talked about in that first one: see and sense and strike. So we're really excited about kind of where launched effects is going. I already mentioned future tactical UAS, getting away from runways, having the capability to operate. We want to buy systems at this pace of technology. So we might buy something in the next year or two and then realize 2 or 3 years later that there is a new technology that's coming along, and we might want to invest in that. So we're looking at how we acquire systems at the speed of change, as opposed to buying into one thing and hanging on to it for 20 years when it's obsolete nearly right off the bat, just given the pace of technological change. And then one of the things that I'd really like us to think about and talk about here today is this open system, the modular open systems approach, right? So every conversation that we have starts with, is it open architecture? Can we adopt new technologies to it? If it doesn't, if it's not, if it is a static system where the organization owns the intellectual property and it's not alterable, then it's probably dead on arrival. So I think probably one of the most important things that we'll talk about today, particularly in the panels, is this idea of bringing future capability in that has this open approach. Okay, so we've made some decisions as an Army over the last couple months. I think it was about 8 months ago, February timeframe, where our senior leaders had to look at the checkbook. They had to look at the capabilities that we were offering. They had to look at the fight that they saw of the future, and they had to make some tough decisions, right? And so they made the deliberate decision to cancel the FARA program. And so while that may be considered a negative for Army aviation, what we ended up doing was harvesting some of that technology and the funds into our current fleet, right? So a lot of that's going to come back into modifying and upgrading the current fleet that we're flying. So the good news is we're gonna get into we're gonna buy more Blackhawks. We're gonna keep that line going. We're buying the Block 2 Chinook right now, which we've already demonstrated with the 101st, and we're looking at whatever other future capabilities that we can bring on board there. One thing that I'd like you to think about today too is as in terms of survivability. So we've got some pretty exquisite survivability equipment that we're bringing on board, and it's expensive, and we're not going to be able to put on everything. But I also, as you look at this slide, would like you to just consider this idea of how Army aviation operates in this domain, right? So if you look at those red bubbles, typically, when we lay over one of these OV1s, we just put, this. I mean, you can see it in that top left bullet there. It says congested in all domains. We think that it's impenetrable, right? We can't get in there. We're going to need the joint force to come in and knock it all down before we can go to work. I would argue that I think Army aviation is survivable today, right? So even today, with the systems we have, the way that we train, the way that we plan, the way that we mitigate risk, I like to describe these little red bubbles rather, we're looking at it from the cockpit view of an F-35 right there, but that's not the domain that we're operating in. Right? If I could, and I don't have the capability, I'd fly you down to where we are, right? Which is in that Air-Ground-Littoral. And if you were in the Air-Ground-Littoral, you might be looking up at the mountains, and you might be looking up at those bubbles. And rather than seeing them as these sort of bubbles that go to the ground, I would argue there may be mushrooms or umbrellas, right? And so they go maybe to a level right above us. But based off all the things that I talked about, how we train and operate and fly and plan, we can get into those bubbles and we can operate. And so I'd like to continue that discussion later today as well. Okay, if we can go to the last slide, please. All right, so I think it's probably naive for me to say that we're at an inflection point, but things are changing, right? They've been changing forever. But we're at a point right now where the world, the geopolitical environment's pretty dangerous. I mean, if you look at Russia and Ukraine, you look at what the Houthis are doing in the Red Sea, you look at China and the Philippines and some of the challenges of the South China Sea, Iran, launching missiles and one-way attack vehicles at Israel, North Korea continuing to advance their missile technology. I mean, you just have to feel like at some point, and unfortunately, we're going to find ourselves in another fight. The good news is we're going to be doing it with our allies and partners. The good news is we're going to be doing it as part of the joint force. But my sense is it's not a matter of if, it's just a matter of when. If you go back in history and think back to World War II, I like to say it was the Army that was flying all those B-17s. That was a generational capability that we brought on board back then. We brought the industrial base up to an RPM that we had never seen before. We took that technology, and as we went through Korea and Vietnam and the House Board, we learned how to operate rotorcraft in an air mobile environment, what we later dubbed as air assault operations, and that's really kind of transformed the Army in vertical envelopment. We brought on board some really capable systems in the UH-1, the AH-1, the OH-6, CH-47, CH-54, some just really impressive capability that allowed us to maneuver around the battlefield in a very dynamic way and perfect that. We went to into the 80s, the 70s and the 80s with the Big Five, right, that brought Army Aviation, the Black Hawk and the Apache. And I think we kind of find ourselves in a similar spot. It's been about 45 years. And we've got, as I mentioned, some pretty generational capability coming on board. We've got the FLRAA, just went through milestone B. It's moving into the engineering manufacture phase, the EMD phase. And you've got the UAS that I talked about, the UAS of yesteryear that was required to be on a runway and you had these large shelters and ground control stations you had to operate out of is no more. We're seeing UAS technology. I mean, we're watching it live. I think everybody in here sees how quickly it's advancing and the lethality that it brings. And so we're looking at how do we adopt that into the Army and how do we make that a capability that we can bring on board and then keep at the pace of technological change. So I think there are a lot of positive things that are happening in the Army Aviation branch. I'm certainly very optimistic and enthusiastic about the future. As I said earlier, we don't operate alone. This isn't Army Aviation about Army Aviation. This is Army Aviation in support of the Army. It's in support of the ground force. It's in support of the Combined Arms Maneuver Team, and it's in support of the Joint Force with our partners and allies. And so we just want to give that team the best capability that we can in terms of delivering equipment, training, doctrine, leaders, all of those things. So with that, I'll wrap it up. Thanks for your ear this morning. I'm really excited about what we're going to hear today. We've got a lot of great folks on the docket. And with that, above the best. Thank you.